Some tunnels were never meant to be explored, and some sounds underground aren't echoes. Story 1. The air in the service tunnel didn't smell like earth. It smelled of wet copper and ancient stagnant rot. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating walls of weeping concrete and rusted conduit pipes that clung to the ceiling like the ossified veins of a giant. I told myself this was just a mapping job. City infrastructure, old sewer overflow access, routine. But as I squeezed through the transition point, moving from the wider primary corridor into the secondary maintenance crawl space, the silence began to press against my eardrums. It wasn't a true silence. It was a suffocating, pressurized weight that made every breath sound like a struggle. I stopped to check my compass, but the needle was spinning in lazy, frantic circles. I tapped the housing, but it didn't stop. That was when I heard it. A dull, rhythmic thrum coming from deep within the walls. It wasn't mechanical. It sounded like a slow, labored heartbeat echoing through the pipes. Thump-thud, thump-thud. I froze, my back pressed against the weeping concrete. The tunnel narrowed here, no more than 4 feet wide. I had to hunch my shoulders, the jagged edges of the rusted pipe scraping against my nylon jacket. The claustrophobia hit me then, a physical blow to the chest. The walls felt like they were leaning inward, narrowing the gap by fractions of an inch every time I inhaled. I turned to head back to the primary shaft, but the beam of my light caught something on the floor. A trail of mud, fresh and glistening, smeared across the rusted metal grating. It didn't look like a footprint. It looked like a drag mark, wide and irregular, leading deeper into the dark. Then the heartbeat stopped. The sudden absence of the thrumming was more terrifying than the noise itself. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trying to escape a cage. I swung my light around, the beam trembling in my grip. "Hello?" I called out. My voice died in instant death, swallowed by the porous concrete. From just 10 feet ahead, in the dark void where the tunnel curved, I heard the unmistakable sound of wet skin sliding against metal. It was a slow, deliberate sound, the friction of something heavy and soft dragging itself across the corrugated pipework. Then came the smell. It was sickly sweet, like a butcher shop left to bake in the sun. I didn't turn around to look. I didn't think. I scrambled backward, my boots slipping on the slick floor, my elbows slamming into the low ceiling. I didn't care about the jagged metal tearing into my skin. I just needed space. I needed sky. As I scrambled, I felt a vibration run through the floor again. Not a heartbeat this time, but the subtle, tectonic shift of something far too large moving toward me in the dark. I reached the junction, shoved through the gap, and bolted, leaving my flashlight behind. I ran until my lungs burned, and even now, sitting in the safety of my kitchen, I can't stop rubbing my arms, trying to scrub away the feeling of that cold, damp air. Story 2. The blueprints called it Section 4B, a neglected utility artery running beneath the city's oldest industrial district. To me, it was just another data point for a structural survey. I crawled through the hatch, the heavy iron lid clanging shut behind me with a finality that made my pulse jump. The air inside was thick, a stagnant, metallic soup of rusted iron, damp concrete, and something vaguely organic, like rotting vegetation. My headlamp cut a pathetic swath through the gloom, illuminating thick veins of conduits and fiber optic cables that clung to the ceiling like gutwork. I moved forward, my boots crunching on grit that shouldn't have been there. The tunnel was tighter than the diagram suggested. I had to hunch, my spine pressed against the cold, weeping concrete of the ceiling. Every few steps, the walls seemed to inch closer, an imperceptible slide of geology reclaiming the space. 10 minutes in, the silence broke. It wasn't a mechanical groan or the skittering of rats. It was a wet, rhythmic thrumming, vibrating through the soles of my boots. It sounded like a massive, slow-beating heart, muffled by miles of earth. I stopped, holding my breath until my lungs burned. The thrumming stopped too. "Hello?" I called out. My voice was instantly swallowed by the damp walls, leaving a hollow, pathetic echo. I pressed on, the claustrophobia beginning to claw at my throat. The tunnel narrowed further, forcing me to rotate my shoulders to squeeze through a limestone pinch point. My headlamp flickered. I cursed, tapping the side of the casing, and when the light stabilized, I froze. Scratched into the concrete at eye level were hundreds of marks, deep, frantic gouges that looked less like graffiti and more like someone had tried to claw their way through the solid wall with their bare fingers. The nails of the person who made them must have been torn to the quick. Then, I heard it again. Closer this time. Scrape. Pause. Drag. It was coming from the darkness ahead, just beyond the reach of my beam. It sounded like something heavy and soft being pulled across the gravel. I didn't think. I pivoted, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I scrambled back toward the hatch, but the tunnel felt different, longer, narrower. The walls seemed to pulse, a rhythmic contraction that made the passage feel like the throat of a living thing. My light caught a glimpse of something white, a sneaker, half buried in the silt. As I stepped over it, I realized it was still laced. The thrumming returned, louder now, and behind me the sound of dragging accelerated. I didn't look back. I reached the ladder and scrambled upward, my fingers slick with cold sweat and grime. I slammed my shoulder against the hatch, praying it hadn't rusted shut. It hadn't. But as I shoved it open and tumbled onto the street above, the last thing I heard from the darkness below wasn't a growl, but a long, rattling sigh, the sound of something finally, mercifully waking up.